Welcome, everyone. My name is Alicia Jackson, and I am the Instructional Design Specialist with ASFPM. We're excited to welcome you to the National Policy Briefing for December 2025. Before we begin, just a few quick administrative items. These are monthly high-level briefings and will take about 30 minutes of your time. Today's session is being recorded. If you'd like to reference it later, the recording will be available in about 1 week, if not sooner. You should see a Q&A feature in Zoom, typically near the bottom of your screen. Feel free to submit your questions there, and we'll address as many as we can at the end, time permitting. And lastly, a quick note that this briefing is not eligible for CECs. Today's agenda includes the following topics: a Washington update, FEMA Review Council, proposed WOTUS rules, and a Q&A. Kicking us off today is Elizabeth Duffy, the ASFPM Washington Liaison, here to walk us through a Washington update. Elizabeth, go ahead when you're ready.
Great. Thanks, Alicia. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to December. Well, after the longest shutdown in history, Congress and the government are getting back to work. The CR that was passed until January 30th, 2026 includes an extension for NFIP, and it includes three of the fiscal 2026 bills: Agriculture, Legislative Branch, and Military Construction and Veterans Affairs. House and Senate appropriators leaders from both parties are looking to combine five more bills into what they call a mini bus in order to try to move those forward. And those bills are the Defense, Labor HHS, Transportation, Housing and Urban Development, CJS, Commerce, Justice and Science, and then the Interior and Environment Bill. But there's still a lot to be worked out between the House versions and the Senate versions of these spending bills. And that means they are more than likely, like 98% chance, not going to pass before Congress recesses for the holidays. So as it is, that will be, as they say, a next year problem. So assuming that they come back from their recess in January, rested and ready to work on FY26 appropriations bills, they'll have a little over a dozen working days to get through this initial group of five and the remaining four appropriations bills, which include Department of Homeland Security and Energy and Water. So those will all have to be passed before we face another shutdown on January 30th. So fingers crossed, and more to come on that as we move into January. On the legislation side, House Transportation and Infrastructure Chairman Sam Graves and Eric Larson, the minority ranking member in the minority side, introduced a bill earlier in the year called the FEMA Act, which seeks to seeks to pull FEMA out from DHS, make it a cabinet level agency, streamline the mitigation framework, push some of the things to the states. That bill has moved through committee, and Chairman Graves feels that the bill will get traction starting in January with a House vote on the floor, which he hopes will spur the Senate to move forward on their companion bill or taking up the House version of the bill. He feels he has White House support, and just earlier in the month of November, he spoke very confidently that he's had conversations with the Senate and with the White House and feels that the bill will get some traction come the new calendar year. We don't have a Senate version in mind right now, although there have been conversations with Senator Hawley and Senator Lankford, and they've indicated that they might take some support as taking the Republican lead on introducing the Senate version, but those conversations have stalled to date. Additionally, more recently, a bill was introduced to amend the Homeowner Flood Insurance Affordability Act to address ecosystem restoration projects. That's HR 6256. That bill was introduced by Montana Representative Downing, and this bill is supported by American Rivers and ASFPM. We've done some work with the staff on crafting the legislative language around that. It will make the ecosystem restoration projects easier to comply with and a bit more streamlined and not as onerous on communities that are looking to do that type of work. Additionally, Senator Cassidy from Louisiana has introduced S 3151. This is called the NFIP Automatic Extension Act. This bill would ensure that there would be an automatic extension of the NFIP in the event of a lapse of authorization through whatever means, whether that's a government shutdown or a bill just not being extended. The bill has been introduced in the Senate, has no other additional supporters at the moment, but it's an interesting take on how to address the fragility of the NFIP as it's tied to the continuing resolutions and the appropriations process. Also on the Senate side, we continue to see work on a couple versions of a comprehensive NFIP reform bill. Back in September, we responded to Senators Cassidy and Booker's request for information on NFIP reform, and we remain in contact with their offices, although legislation has not been forthcoming as of yet. And we also know that the Senate Banking Committee, which has jurisdiction over NFIP, has the National Flood Insurance Program Working Group, which is led by Senators Kennedy and Rounds. And we know that these offices have also been working on legislation on comprehensive NFIP reform as well. So we'll hopeful as the new year comes into play, we'll see some language around what could be construed as comprehensive and long-lasting NFIP reform and reauthorization. We remain in contact with those offices, continue to reach out and offer our advice and input, and share our recommendations for what a revamped NFIP would look like. We also have a new acting administrator at FEMA as of Monday. Karen Evans has been named acting administrator for FEMA. She was the chief of staff prior to this elevation. We're contemplating engaging that office sometime into the new year, just for introductory purposes and let them know that we're here as a resource moving forward. We're also watching just recently, today, the White House indicated that they'd like to pursue another reconciliation bill to address affordability issues. This would be a really big lift for Speaker Mike Johnson and Majority Leader Thune to bring another reconciliation bill through the process and pass. And the reason why we're paying attention to that, not necessarily because of what will be contained in this bill, but because of the amount of time and effort it will pull from the representatives and senators' already compact schedule. We're watching to see if that derails any of the other forward progress that we would see on floodplain bills and NFIP reform. So while we're not running out of issues or ideas or even supportive congressional offices, we are running out of time. With the appropriations pushed to January, the potential or the real potential for another potential shutdown on January 30th, this White House push for a reconciliation bill, and regular efforts on legislation with hearings and committee votes and all the other things that Congress does, we may not see meaningful NFIP and floodplain legislation get the attention that it needs until later next calendar year. And then you layer on top of that, that unfortunately we are in an election cycle that almost never ends. And the primary season for the midterm elections gears up in the springtime of 2026. So as we move towards the general election in 2026, we'll also have additional demands on the times of our elected officials, further pulling them away from their obligations here in DC. So we have a lot of pokes in the fire, and we'll have to pay a lot of attention to what's going on up on Capitol Hill, and we'll see what January brings. That's all I have.
Thank you for that update, Elizabeth. Up next, we'll hear from Chad Berginnis, the ASFPM Executive Director, who will brief us on the FEMA Review Council. Chad, the floor is yours when you're ready.
All right, great. Thank you very much. And welcome to our combined November, December policy briefing. So as the calendar year winds down, so does the work of the very interesting FEMA Review Council as well. The Review Council had a charge essentially of making recommendations for improving or changing FEMA, basically kind of to make recommendations on the future of FEMA. And that work is largely complete. Hopefully many of you, if not all of you, saw a recent member alert that ASFPM put out. But next Thursday, December 11th, from 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern, the FEMA Review Council is set to meet and release or at least reveal to all of us in the public final recommendations or final draft recommendations. In the notice that we had previously seen, it had indicated that the meeting will have remarks from senior leadership, remarks and updates from council leadership, a presentation of the draft final report from the final report subcommittee, a presentation of a summary of public comments, council deliberations, and a public vote on the draft final report. There have been, and I can tell you, I've talked with a number of our members at ASFPM about different things they're hearing, even maybe where there's relationships with individual council members. And sometimes some of what they're hearing is at direct odds with what somebody else is hearing. So I think it's probably fair to say that we're not exactly sure what will come out of this, other than we do think some of the recommendations will come out. But in terms of the actual final report, I think that's still to be determined. So the meeting registration, again, I will happy to put this in the chat in terms of how to register, at least from our member alert, or if one of the policy team members would do that. And also, members of the public can provide comments on the final report as outlined in the Federal Register, and the deadline for those comments is December 31st, 2025. At this point, especially before the meeting, ASFPM is not going to be developing any official comments right now. We have previously provided the Review Council now 4 different sets of comments in May, July, August, and the latest set of comments in October, where we were responding to some probably credible rumors that one of the elements of the report could be some commentary on the NFIP, and it may go the direction of partial privatization. And so we developed a letter to talk about the potential consequences of something like that. But I do know that that Elizabeth just this morning did attend a partnership meeting. One of the many partnerships ASFPM participates in is something called the Stafford Coalition, and maybe have gotten some, at least the latest intel or speculation, as it might be, on the Review Council meeting and report. And so I'll actually ask Elizabeth to come back on, if you would, and just share maybe anything that anything that you heard that might have been of interest on the regarding the Review Council, the Review Council meeting.
Sure, Chad. Thanks. As Chad mentioned, the meeting on Thursday will sort of outline what we're doing, what the FEMA Review Council is doing, and then they will need to vote on the recommendations. So we'll wait to see what happens after that, whether that vote will take place on the 11th, but it's expected that the vote might actually be the following day. What we're hearing is that the administration is definitely looking at the FEMA Review Council report as recommendations and not necessarily a blueprint for action, which probably indicates the administration will pick and choose from the report what it is they think they can implement. We had heard, as Chad mentioned, a concern that possibly there would be a strong recommendation for the privatization of NFIP. We participated in a letter, as Chad mentioned, as did others, outlining the challenges and the difficulties and downright trauma that would result from privatizing NFIP. And we're hearing that that has been softened, if not removed completely from the recommendations list. So we'll watch very closely for that as well. It does not appear that FEMA will be moving to Texas, although that is not confirmed. Just the general scuttlebutt from conversations that other members had around the table seemed to indicate that although it was floated by Kristi Noem that perhaps FEMA would be relocated to Texas, it does not appear that that will come to fruition. We also have heard that OMB is much more reserved about some of these broad-based changes to FEMA as an agency than maybe DHS is as a whole, that Russ Vought actually wants us to sort of take a more measured response to moving forward on the FEMA changes than Kristi Noem seems to indicate. So that might give rise to some tension between the secretary and the administration. So of course, we'll watch for that as well. We have heard that the report is strongly state focused, that it does appear to be systems oriented and does seek to shift a lot of the responsibility to the individual states. We'll need to wait to see what specifics that spells out for how the states might have difficulty implementing those changes. But those are sort of the consensus intel that those of us at the Stafford Coalition meeting were able to share with one another. And we will wait and see. Next Thursday will be a fun day.
Yes, so definitely get your soda, your popcorn, and stay tuned to that. And in all seriousness, we do know, and I think one of the things Elizabeth and I, she was able to brief me on review regarding the Stafford Coalition, is that we know and we're hearing from other organizations that especially the ones that represent local government, that the longer FEMA dysfunction goes on, the more difficult it is getting out there in any number of ways. And whether it be reimbursements from outstanding public assistance, to mitigation grants where FEMA has gone silent even on, whether it's a Swift current application or FMA, or the Cooperating Technicals Partners Program. There are lots of things out there, and we just want to let folks know that we are, trying to where we can, and try to make effective comments and things to, one, preserve the programs, but two, also try to compel action. But the Elizabeth, one of the things that you said that really kind of caught my ear at that coalition meeting, and there's representatives from many organizations that have been doing federal policy work for a long time. And I think the thing that you told me was traditional methods of compelling action are not working right now. Elizabeth, did you want to elaborate on that at all? I think that's just kind of an important concept in terms of just overall describing what's going on.
Sure. I mentioned to Chad that around the table there were many of us that have, double-digit careers in government relations and advocacy and public policy, and we were all sort of commiserating that traditional methods of communicating, sharing ideas, educating and influencing Congress and the administration and various agencies was not yielding the results that we had seen in administrations past and Congress's past, both Republican led and Democratic led. That our efforts at coalition building or writing letters or seeking to have meaningful conversations through virtual or in-person meetings weren't yielding the same results. And it was to the point that all of us were sort of thinking, I'm just throwing everything at the wall to try to see what sticks and who it is that has the ear of whomever is ultimately making the final decision. And within this administration, that is a very, very close-knit group, which seems to be somewhat capricious in depending on the issue and oftentimes the day of the week. So we're, as a community, finding it challenging to identify who are the trusted confidants of this White House that would benefit from our counsel, our efforts at education and input, and therefore could carry that message forward. We're not yielding the same results as we have from the same efforts moving forward. So we're getting inventive and thinking outside the box and working on creating sort of cross industry or shared interest coalitions to amplify our voice on Capitol Hill. Each of us individually, NACO, NEMA, ASFPM, we're all kind of scrambling at the same time.
Indeed. Thank you, Elizabeth. And so that, again, please refer to the member alert if you'd like to see some of the input that ASFPM has previously provided, and then watch out, whether it be through our newsletters or future member alerts in terms of, any actions that we might be taking, once we hear what the recommendations are, that way as well. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Alicia. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. For our next topic, proposed WOTUS rules, we're joined by David Conrad, the ASFPM Water Resource Policy Specialist. Go ahead, David, when you're ready.
Hi, Alicia. Thanks. I came in just a little late on some of this, and I didn't hear whether this came through, but it seems to me there is a variety of different opinions on that on that council. And I think it's been roiling to a certain extent. But I think there are voices that that will be important in whatever they recommend. Voices of reason. So that's all I have to add there. Hopefully, yeah. And this is another area where I'm afraid we're not. This isn't all the best news in the world, but as most of you know, ASFPM has paid close attention to regulation and protection of wetlands, particularly for their natural flood management and retention roles, as well as protection of natural and wildlife habitats, filtering of sediments and pollutants, maintaining and storing groundwater, and helping communities protect and maintain clean water. The Clean Water Act wetlands protection laws and regulations, particularly the Act's definition of what constitutes the federal jurisdictional waters of the United States, where the Clean Water Act applies, or WOTUS, was catapulted onto the national stage yet again on November 17th, when the EPA and the Department of Army Corps of Engineers issued a new proposed rule that is now out for public comment. The proposed rule is printed in the Federal Register of November 20th. The rule comes with a 45-day comment period closing at the end of the day on Monday, January 5th. It is the next installment on attempts by the agencies to further interpret the U.S. Supreme Court's WOTUS decision in Sackett v. EPA from 2023. For those of you considering submitting comments, they can easily be submitted through the Federal Register's website at regulations.gov. And the proposed rule can be found out there, or just Google by searching for waters of the United States. The major concerns are that the proposed rule quite admittedly will further limit federal jurisdiction over the current rules. The Corps estimates it would reduce to approximately 19% of the currently mapped U.S. wetlands, those that would fall under Corps and EPA regulation, and depending on what the final rule looks like, threatens to all but eliminate federal jurisdiction in the arid West. About half of the states depend only on the federal jurisdiction for wetland protection, or for defining the areas of wetland protection. On April 23rd, ASFPM joined the National Association of Wetland Managers in making detailed comments on the notice of request for recommendations as EPA and the Corps were developing the proposed rules. And those comments are, I believe, posted on our ASFPM website. The proposed rule attempts to further define the Sackett interpretation that wetlands must have a continuous connection to a relatively permanent traditional navigable water, and that these are basically indistinguishable from the water to which they are adjacent. The proposed rule focuses on defining what relatively permanent means, as defined by an earlier Supreme Court's Rapanos decision before Sackett, and tries to deal with ephemeral streams and wetlands, as well as how to treat physical connections such as berms, dikes, and canals. The proposed rule also introduces a concept of whether a wetland generally exists through a wet season. Many, that's in quotes, many are reacting to this concept, or that this concept is fairly poorly defined as it applies across the nation. The proposed rule also includes a possible alternative to simply regulate perennial waters and wetlands and drop the intermittents. There's a lot of speculation that wouldn't fly, but it's in the proposed rule. We can predict that no matter what the final rule is, there will likely be additional litigation. but we have to agree that most wetlands are poor places for human occupation, at least overnight. And as federal jurisdiction through the Clean Water Act is being limited, states, tribes, and local governments are again going to need to take up these development issues more and more, and unfortunately, sometimes on their own. That's all. Alicia?
Okay, thank you very much, David. We'll now take a few questions. It looks like we have one inquiring if there's any information on a NOFO for CTPs.
This is Chad. Unfortunately, we have not received any really any credible information on that at this point. One of the things we were talking about on the policy team is after the FEMA Review Council recommendations coming out, trying to be back in touch with some of our contacts at the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, who have been pretty supportive, I think, of a lot of the FEMA programs in the past, and sometimes can get things kind of unstuck and see if we can get a little bit more information. Certainly, the government shutdown would have set back any timelines that they had before the government shutdown. It continues to be our thought, anyways, that with both CTP and also possibly some of the mitigation grants, at least the pre-disaster ones, is that those NOFOs could be coming in a later tranche of NOFOs. The ones that came out in August being the ones that they had to get out by the end of the federal fiscal year. But we don't know, but we really have not heard anything specific on either the CTP NOFOs or any of the hazard mitigation NOFOs at this point.
Okay, thanks, Chad. Another question, any word on block grants to states to fund emergency management, and what about mitigation?
Elizabeth, I don't know at the Stafford meeting today, but I think you kind of said a general theme is more stuff going to states in terms of from the review council standpoint. Can you maybe elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, and unfortunately, I don't have much more on that other than what we're hearing some of the recommendations are, and this aligns with what we've seen come out of the administration and what we've heard Secretary Nome say as well, is an intent to make the states more responsible for not only response and recovery, but mitigation in advance of the disaster by using block grants. But they haven't really specified or articulated clearly how they intend to do that and what they intend to use as a vehicle to do so. And definitely haven't considered states' capacity to prepare for and also survive between disasters. We've talked about a bit about the uneven hand of some states that are prepared for disasters because they are an annual event for them, and others who get them once every 2 or 3 years. And how do you ensure that states that are not burdened by disasters on a regular basis still have what they need in place to ensure the safety and public welfare of their citizens? So we would see the FEMA Review Council possibly spell out changes in IA and PA and how they would do mitigation grants as well. But I have not had any specificity on HMGP or any other FMA grants in that light.
Okay, thank you both. Another question asking if there's any news on FEMA providing extensions to existing FEMA awards.
So certainly no official news that we've heard from FEMA. However, I think on a more informal basis, one of the things that we do is we do hold a quarterly mentoring call with state NFIP coordinators and SHMOs, and I had the privilege of facilitating the SHMO group, and at least a common theme that I did hear is that FEMA seemed to be less inclined on granting extensions to periods of performance. And again, so with the state mitigation offices, those are going to be hazard mitigation grants that may not have the same relevance to either CTP or the CAP SASE grants, but there did seem to be a theme that I heard where FEMA was scrutinizing those requests and even denying those in some cases that way. So that's probably the best intel we have at this point.
Okay, thank you. We have time for one more, asking if there's any news if there's going to be an FY25 BRIC and FMA grant cycle.
So I'm trying to recall several years back where the federal government couldn't get its act together and passed a budget, kind of late in the spring. And with a situation like that, if I'm recalling correctly, what they did instead of running, that previous year's grant cycle and the current year that we were in that cycle, they combined the funds for both of them into the current year cycle. So again, we've heard nothing officially, and if I think one of the possibilities could be is that you could see an FY26 cycle that might include, some of the appropriations or something in FY25 and be kind of a combined cycle. That's just kind of my speculation, but I seem to recall FEMA having done something like that before, as a way to do that.
Okay, thank you. We are at time, so that brings us to the end of our 30-minute briefing. Thank you all so much for attending today. We appreciate your engagement and ongoing interest in national floodplain policy updates. Please mark your calendars and join us again on Thursday, January 29th for our next policy briefing. We look forward to seeing you then. Bye, everyone.